There's an esoteric topic I've been contemplating, and it occurred to me that the Star Wars sequel trilogy provides a way into that discussion. The Star Wars sequels are pretty divisive, so I want to say up front that this video isn't exactly about these films. I'm using these movies primarily as a conceptual framework to help me organize and share my thoughts on a topic which I've been trying to wrap my head around. In the event this video attracts Star Wars sequel haters, let me be clear. I get it. When I walked out of Rise of Skywalker, I said I'd never watch anything Star Wars ever again. I was wrong, of course, so just know that I agree with a lot of the usual critiques. These movies are considered corporate abominations by a lot of fandom. To be fair, I do think there are positive highlights in all three movies. A lot of great special effects, some fun sequences, and for the most part, solid acting performances. If someone enjoys these movies, that's all fine with me. I also think that Rey's storyline speaks to something deeper. I'm not saying I agree with, or that I am defending, the creative choices made by Disney and the filmmakers involved with these sequels. What I am attempting to do here is look at the work as is, and come to a conclusion about what it might mean for us as viewers. The unconscious speaks through all creative works, oftentimes even without the artists realizing what it's saying. The Star Wars sequels might be such a case. Much has been made of Star Wars and its mythological resonance for our modern-day audiences. In the original trilogy, you have Luke Skywalker's hero's journey, the hero with 1,000 faces. This is the monomyth framework popularized by Joseph Campbell and still used and overused in screenwriting classes to date. In the prequel trilogy, we get to see the full scope of Anakin Skywalker's Chosen One story. The rise, fall, and redemption of a hero who had been prophesied to save the world. That resonates mythologically too, and has also been overused in my opinion. Rey, however, feels shoehorned in. For the longest time I thought she didn't have her own myth. Even Rey herself is lost, saying, "I need someone to show me my place in all of this." Love it or hate it, I think her storyline does point at something that resonates. I think Rey speaks to something in all of our hearts. Each of us is born into this world and society, taught its ways, and provided different stories about our place in it. But often, there is a nagging sense that there's more to existence than the eye can see, and that the status quo has mostly just exploited us. Despite inconsistencies in the writing, there does seem to be a connective tissue running through all three sequels. I think it points in the nebulous direction of something usually referred to as the Ancestors. I think Rey's storyline mirrors our own disconnection from the Ancestors, from the realm of the dead. Like us, Rey belongs to a culture and generation whose sacred ties to the unseen have long been severed, connections once revered by earlier generations, now forgotten. The popularity of shows like Finding Your Roots speaks to how so many of us are disconnected from our ancestors and long for that connection. The overwhelming trend of nostalgia content in recent years certainly has to do with the hollowness of our corporate media landscape, but it is in my view also a reflection of a quest for something we once had, but is now gone. George Lucas himself famously said that Disney didn't want to try something new with their Star Wars sequels, but instead wanted to do something for the fans, something retro. By this I think he meant that Disney gave into the audience's craving for unapologetic nostalgia. Instead of taking the Star Wars saga in a totally new creative direction, inspired and infused by the magic of the original films, Disney mostly just recycled ideas. I think the law of diminishing returns applies here. Repeating the same formula, doing the same thing over and over again, inevitably loses the magic that makes something feel special in the first place. The challenge is to take the magic of the old and bring it back to life within our time. And The Force Awakens, despite copying many story beats from the original Star Wars, was initially very well received, and a lot of that was probably due to how familiar it felt. But that feeling wore out. The critiques that the sequels portray the original cast as broken down, old, and washed up tracks with how the status quo teaches us to view our elders, spent, disposable, and faded into irrelevance. This leads to the phenomenon of aged heroes and leaders grasping desperately to their youth, like Han Solo, instead of embracing a more traditionally appropriate role as wisdom keeper and guide for newer generations. It increasingly feels like our culture's elders are stuck trying to be their younger selves, and this is to everyone's detriment. Ray's story points to what it would mean to not only embody an ancient tradition within oneself, but more broadly, on what it means to re-establish a connection between the realm of the living and the dead. I think the sequels bring questions that George Lucas incorporated into the first 6 episodes into clearer focus. What does it mean to live forever? What is immortality? Ben Solo also struggles with finding his place in all of this. Unlike Ray, Ben knows his family history and was presented with a clear path and tradition to follow, but he was let down by the very elders who were meant to nurture his growth. He goes on to worship his dead grandfather's alter ego Vader, pathetically cosplaying as him. The concept of grandfather, abuelo, as an ancestral elder holds profound spiritual significance across indigenous cultures and many societies with long-standing traditions of ancestor veneration, such as those in present-day China, where ancestors still serve as bridges between the physical and spiritual realms, act as guardians of cultural continuity, and embodiments of wisdom. Ben's huge mistake is to confuse and conflate Vader's death mask with his grandfather's true spirit. Vader was an egoic creation, a murderous persona stemming from Anakin's fear of death and desire to know the secrets of immortality. As we learn from Palpatine, the evil Sith are obsessed with the idea of bodily immortality and use the dark technological abilities of the status quo in order to live forever. I remember hating the scene at the end of Revenge of the Sith, where Vader is portrayed clumsily as Frankenstein's monster. It made me cringe and laugh. But looking back, at least thematically, I actually think it works better now with the sequels in place. Vader was mostly a machine, and he's a zombie corpse in some ways. Lucas wanted to highlight the tragedy that is the Sith's approach to immortality. We see a better grotesque depiction of that dynamic when we see Palpatine on life support in The Rise of Skywalker. Ben, in his new persona of Kylo Ren, has succumbed to a cynical mindset that many of us have bought into. You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing. Let the past die. Kill it if you have to. That's the only way to become who you're meant to be. The controversial writer Graham Hancock has at least one quote that I think is on point. He often says that we are a species with amnesia, and he has written about his adventures taking ibogaine, a psychedelic substance used in some African traditions. Some say it can serve as a bridge to the ancestors. I think Hancock's overall approach to the past, honoring its mysteries, is what helps keep him popular. People connect with that, even though many of his specific claims have been widely disputed and sparked backlash. I think the sequels offer an alternative to the Sith's dark, industrial, technological methods of life extension. And this involves making a spiritual connection with the ancestors. In Rise of Skywalker, Rey and friends visit a literal festival of the ancestors. This tribal festival, with very active dancing and chanting, is said to take place every 42 years, which apparently happens to be the length of time between the original Star Wars and Rise of Skywalker. The much ridiculed line, "No one's ever really gone," which many take as a cynical ploy to justify revisiting intellectual property and digitally reviving dead actors, can be understood within the narrative as a pointing to the veneration of one's ancestors, the knowing that those we have lost, but are loved and honored, are never really lost. The sequels continue to cause controversy to this day by having the beloved hero Luke Skywalker drop out of society, traveling secretly to the ends of the cosmos in order to find the first Jedi temple, and to watch over the ancient texts as a hermit. These old books serve as Luke's final connection to his ancient lineage. The wise sage Yoda, who reappears from the realm of the dead, teaches Luke that sacred texts are not to be made an idol, and he reinforces the idea that the continuity of the ancient ways takes precedence over the imperfections of its carriers. By the end of the saga, both Luke and Rey learn that their lineage lives on. She is now its embodiment. It's not to be found externally. She connects to it spiritually through a trance-like state. This is the rise of Skywalker. Peter Kingsley describes how in ancient Tibetan, the term Skywalker was used to describe both an arrow as well as a shaman-like figure who becomes immersed in a form of ecstasy, an altered state of consciousness, allowing for a form of contact with the sacred. Rey's connection to her lineage brings to my mind what some esoteric-minded academics call the golden chain. The term golden chain has been used in different traditions over the ages, often with some crossover, revival, or reinterpretation of its meaning. A more mystical occult application of this term describes a lineage that appears at key moments in the historical record within different cultural contexts, and just as promptly disappears. It's a hidden, sacred line of esoteric teaching. It doesn't carry on because of blood, genetics, or even formal, well-structured education and rites of passage, but instead it appears when someone is initiated into the deepest mysteries of the cosmos, establishing a link between the world of the living and that of the dead. I'm not referring to just maintaining an honorific approach to the media and practices passed down to us through recorded history. This Weird Studies podcast episode and its accompanying article speak to that approach. That's all well and good. But Luke is an example of why this isn't enough. Despite his seclusion, he still holds the sacred Jedi texts in reverence, but he has cut himself from the true force that surrounds him in the present moment, where his lineage, his ancestors reside. I'm also not talking about fascist nostalgia for a mythic golden age. That's the mistake Ben Solo made by idolizing Vader and the Empire. What I'm talking about is an almost tangible, vibrant link to the realm of the dead, a realm that exists concurrently with us right now. And while this may sound extremely new age, even to me to be honest, it is true that even a beacon of our era's scientism had personal intuitions along these lines. In my view, the entirety of the Skywalker saga, including Rey's story, presents us with a question. How does one achieve immortality? Is it through the dark technology of the Sith, keeping the body alive as long as possible, replacing bodies as necessary? Or is it through an alchemical spiritual art? A transformation of states along a unified continuum, a practice which embraces the reality of death as transformation instead of running away from it. C.G. Jung explored the idea of what he called the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist. This is what I call the status quo. He contrasted this with the spirit of the depths, a primordial, otherworldly intelligence that can lead an individual through a process of alchemical transformation. In Star Wars, communication with the spirit of the depths is represented by surreal visions and the ability to commune with the dead. The Rise of Skywalker's opening crawl famously starts with the phrase, "The dead speak." Palpatine, who was thought to be dead, and is mostly dead, speaks to the galaxy through mass broadcasting technology. In contrast, the Jedis who gained the ability to speak from beyond the grave kept this practice an esoteric secret. When Obi-Wan passed into death, he understood that he'd become more powerful than Vader could possibly imagine, but he would only speak to those who have ears to hear. Many esoteric traditions speak of an unseen community of beings that exist outside of ordinary perception, but nevertheless influence the spiritual journey. C.G. Jung channeled a piece called 7 Sermons to the Dead, and when Jung recounted his near-death experience, he mentioned that in the other realm, he had encountered all the people he belonged with in reality. Kingsley paraphrased a message that Jung was trying to get across with his more esoteric work. Nobody understands that you have to find your own dead. The Jedis learned how to achieve immortality through death, and passed it down via an esoteric practice within their lineage. Terence McKenna explained it like this. The goal is by a process which we can call yogic, or alchemical, or meditative, or moral/ethical. The light must be gathered and concentrated in the body, and then somehow released and redeemed. Esoteric traditions, East and West, talk about the creation of this body of light. The notion is the creation of this vehicle of light. This brings to my mind the ancient Egyptian priests at the House of Life, steeped in alchemical practices concerning the immortality of the soul. They were described as, quote, those who know the forms of the ancestors. By the end of the sequel trilogy, Luke, Ben, and Rey have all connected with the voices of the dead. I agree with critiques that say Palpatine's reveal as Rey's biological grandfather was ham-fisted and poorly executed, but it does present Rey with an important thematic choice: serve the spirit of the times, or serve the spirit of the depths. Palpatine claims that all the Sith live in him. He says that power lies within his bloodline. a nod to the over-reliance on blood count technology in the prequels. Rey counters this by establishing her connection with the dead. She asks them to be with her. She hears the voice of the Jedi Master who first achieved the alchemy of immortality within the series. He tells her that every Jedi who ever lived lives in you. I think this can come off like a screenwriting act of desperation, an attempt to solidify the importance of a character that so many fans didn't warm up to, that so many considered to be a usurper. But taken esoterically, this is actually a profound statement. The dead, the ancestors, live on within those that are able to walk between worlds, the Skywalkers, and moreover, they are in some obscure, impossible way brought back from the dead through this connection. Only by drawing on them can Rey prevail, and even then, she totally exhausts her power, briefly joining her ancestors in death, only to be revived through the power of the alchemical hieros gamos, the mystical union of the opposites, which I've covered so often on this channel. The divine dyad, where the two are one. The trilogy ends with her taking on the name of Skywalker. This certainly annoyed many, but within the context I'm discussing here, it's not as simple as a case of identity theft. It's a profound identification with her ancestors. It's a marker that she's found her place. She's a link in the golden chain. As she looks into the horizon, she sees Luke and Leia, her dead, in the form of a pairing of masculine and feminine. Looking upon these spiritual ancestors, Rey is filled with a sense of meaning and belonging. This is the power of the spiritual symbols called grandfather and grandmother, abuelo and abuela. Like it or not, I think Rey's myth is a myth for our time, for our generation, for those of us so disconnected from the unseen. This is the myth of the hero who establishes a connection to the ancestors, to the spiritual lineage that can be found within one's own heart, no matter how broken external worldly structures seem. This is the hero that can then draw on this power, someone who serves as a link between worlds, catalyzing alchemical transformation in this world. This is visualized by Rey's unique lightsaber color seen at the end of the Skywalker saga. It points to the alchemical gold of the alchemists. Ours is a world that very much requires rousing, that requires transformation. This is the myth of the hero through which the Force awakens and the status quo that we sadly call life is roused, shaken up. The sequels, as disappointing as they were, I think actually touch on a difficult truth. The ways of hope, of looking outwards, and only ahead, into the future, making plans and hoping they'll come to fruition, just aren't going to cut it anymore. James Hillman warned against relying too much on hope, because it, quote, projects you forward and takes you away from what is. The technology of our era can now steal and pull from all recorded history and regurgitate it back to us, a sort of false ancestor, but raw knowledge is not wisdom. So the question rises again, how does one take knowledge of the ancient ways, the magic of the old, and bring it back to life within our time? As human beings, we can stop and turn within. We can listen in closely. We all have an opportunity to hear from our own dead. It is possible to touch inside of oneself the original meaning of the word philosophy. Love of wisdom, wisdom personified as a living force. Terence McKenna suggested the idea of an archaic revival. What I'm suggesting is an archaic revival needs to take place. There was an unbroken thread that, however thinly drawn, persists all the way to the present. So the idea is to show the way back to the high magic, that there were minority points of view that kept the faith, that never allowed it to die. This alchemical, Gnostic, Egyptian, Chaldean thread is the thread. If we unravel it with sufficient care and attention, then we can build a bridge. Peter Kingsley notes that we cannot act effectively until we are grounded in eternity. The great spiritual beings, whatever you want to call them, you can encounter them when you have experienced the fact that the whole sense world exists inside you. This is the golden chain that connects the past, present, and future, that is always in the present, but contains the knowledge of the essence of the past, and also offers the wisdom of how to move forward into the future. This is where the great beings work from, with purpose, with insight. So as we wrap up here, I urge you to reflect on whether you're caught up in the spirit of the times, and consider whether you have consciously or unconsciously cut yourself off from the spirit of the depths. The next installment in my Ancestor series will likely focus on Ryan Coogler's film Sinners. Thanks for watching.